The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, broadcast simultaneously to every human colony, outpost and ship in known space. Ambassador Elena Vasquez read it for the third time in her office on Luna Station, her coffee growing cold as she tried to understand what she was seeing. 12 different alien species had signed the same document, species that had been at war with each other for thousands of years, species that refused to share the same space stations, species that had never agreed on anything in recorded galactic history. Now they all wanted to talk to humanity. "Ma'am?" Lieutenant Chen knocked on her doorframe. "The President is on secure line 1. The Secretary General is holding on line 2, and I have 17 more world leaders waiting." Elena rubbed her temples. 3 years ago, humanity had been alone in the universe. Then they found the jump gates. Then they met the Zephyrians, who introduced them to the Crystalline Collective, who showed them the trade routes that connected 47 different civilizations across the galaxy. It had been exciting, overwhelming, wonderful. Now Elena stared at the message again and wondered what they had done wrong. "Tell them I'll call back in an hour," she said. "I need to understand this first." The document was written in perfect English, though Elena could see the translation markers embedded in the text. Someone had spent time making sure humans would understand every word. They were being summoned, not invited. Summoned. The location was Concordia Prima, a neutral space station that floated in the empty space between 3 major star systems. Elena had never been there, but she knew about it. The aliens used it for peace talks when their wars got too expensive to continue. The date was next week. The subject line made her stomach twist. Regarding human expansion activities and required compliance measures. Elena pulled up her personal files on each of the 12 species that had signed the message. The Zephyrian hegemony controlled over 300 systems through military force. Their ships were older than human civilization, and they had never lost a war. The Crystalline Collective had been mining asteroids since before Earth's dinosaurs died out. They owned most of the rare metals that kept galactic civilization running. Then there were the smaller powers. The Vorthan Empire, which had once controlled 1,000 worlds before the Zephyrians conquered half of them. The Silicon Confederacy, which had given up trying to expand centuries ago, and now just defended what they had left. 8 other species that had learned to survive by not making waves. All of them wanted to talk to humanity. Elena's door chimed again. This time it was Captain Rodriguez from the Military Liaison Office. "Ambassador," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "I've been reviewing our expansion reports. I think I know why they're upset." Elena gestured for him to continue. "In the last 3 years, we've established colonies in 47 systems. That's more than most species expand in 1,000 years. We've been taking in refugees from every war zone we can find. We've been sharing our technology with anyone who asks." Rodriguez paused. "And we've been doing it all without asking permission." "Permission from who?" "That's just it. There's apparently a whole system of who gets to do what, where they can expand, how much technology they're allowed to develop. Nobody told us about it because they assumed we already knew." Elena felt a cold weight settling in her chest. "What kind of system?" Rodriguez activated his tablet and projected a holographic map of local space. Different colors showed which species controlled which regions. "See how neat it all is? Clean boundaries, no overlap. Everyone stays in their lane." Elena studied the map. The human colonies showed up as bright blue dots scattered across multiple regions. They weren't following any pattern. They had settled wherever they found good planets, often in systems that bordered 2 or 3 different species' territories. "We've been making everyone nervous," she realized. "More than that. Look at these trade reports." Rodriguez switched the display. "Human colonies are trading directly with each other and with anyone else who wants to trade. We're not going through the established trade routes. We're not paying the fees. We're not following the rules that everyone else follows." The picture became clearer. For thousands of years, the galaxy had worked a certain way. Big species controlled everything. Small species survived by serving the big ones. Everyone stayed in their assigned place. Technology spread slowly, carefully controlled by those in power. Then humans had arrived and ignored all of it. How bad is it? Elena asked. Bad. We've got former Vorthon slaves building new lives on human colonies. We've got Zephyrian scientists working on joint research projects with our universities. We've got trade ships carrying human-manufactured goods to systems that we're supposed to buy from crystalline collective minds. Elena stared at the data flowing across the holographic display. Refugee populations, technological exchanges, new trade partnerships, things that had seemed like simple humanitarian work or basic commerce. To the established powers, it must look like revolution. Ma'am? Lieutenant Chen appeared in the doorway again. I have the president on hold, and now the Chinese premier is calling. Also, something called the Galactic Trade Oversight Committee is demanding to speak with you immediately. Elena looked at the message one more time. 12 species that hated each other, all agreeing that humanity was a problem that needed to be solved. Rodriguez, she said slowly, how many humans are there in the 47 colonies? About 800 million, spread across all the settlements, plus another 2 billion on Earth and in the Sol system. And how many people total are in these 12 species? Rodriguez consulted his tablet. Hard to get exact numbers, but estimates suggest around 400 billion across all their territories. Elena did the math. Humanity was outnumbered 400 to 1. If it came to a fight, there would be no fight at all. Just a very brief massacre. But maybe it wouldn't come to that. Maybe they could explain. Maybe they could work something out. She stood up and straightened her jacket. Chen, tell the president I'll take his call now. Rodriguez, start putting together a delegation. We're going to Concordia Prima. How many people? Rodriguez asked. Elena looked out her window at the busy space lanes around Luna Station. Human. Ships mixed with alien vessels carrying goods and people between the colonies. 3 years ago, this had all been empty space. Small team, she said. We're going to negotiate, not intimidate. Get me 5 people who understand our colonial policies, our trade agreements, and our refugee programs. Make sure at least 2 of them have experience dealing with alien cultures. Yes, ma'am. What's our position going to be? Elena picked up the message from her desk and read it one final time. The language was polite, formal, and absolutely inflexible. They were being told to appear at a specific place and time to discuss their compliance with rules they had never been told existed. Our position, she said, is that we're willing to listen. We're willing to explain what we've been doing and why. We're willing to work with our galactic neighbors to find solutions that work for everyone. Rodriguez nodded and headed for the door. Rodriguez? Elena called after him. Yes, ma'am? Make sure the ship we take has a full fuel tank and clearance for immediate departure from any port, just in case. Elena looked back out at the space lanes, watching human and alien ships working side by side. Just in case, she confirmed. Concordia Prima was the largest space station Elena had ever seen. It stretched for kilometers in every direction, a massive construction of metal and crystal that housed the diplomatic machinery of galactic civilization. Ships from dozens of species docked at its ports, but Elena noticed that each species had its own section, its own docking bays, its own areas where others were not welcome. The human delegation's ship, the UES Harmony, looked tiny next to the massive Zephyrian dreadnought that occupied the military dock. Their small diplomatic vessel seemed almost pathetic compared to the kilometer-long crystalline collective mining ship that served as that species' mobile embassy. First time here? Asked Dr. Sarah Kim, the human delegation's specialist on alien cultures. Elena nodded. You? Second time. Came here 5 years ago as part of a scientific exchange program. Back then, humans were just a curiosity, a new species that might be useful for something. They were escorted through the station by a floating robot that spoke in pleasant tones about the station's history. Concordia Prima had been built 3,000 years ago after a war that nearly destroyed half the galaxy. It was neutral ground, where species that normally killed each other on sight could meet and talk. The corridors were wide enough for creatures much larger than humans. The gravity was set to accommodate beings that had evolved on different worlds. The air mixture would support life forms that breathed different gases. Everything about the place said that it was designed for species far older and more established than humanity. Elena's team was small. Besides Dr. Kim, she had brought Colonel Morrison from military intelligence, Dr. Patel, who understood the colonial expansion programs, and trade specialist Williams, who knew the economic data by heart. 5 humans to represent 800 million colonists and 2 billion people back home. They were led to a waiting area outside the main conference chamber. Through the transparent walls, Elena could see the huge circular room where the meeting would take place. 12 different seating areas were arranged around a central space, each designed for a different species' physical needs. The Zephyrian section had high, narrow chairs suitable for their tall, thin bodies. The Crystalline Collective's area was filled with special platforms that could support their massive, rock-like forms. Each species had brought their own environmental systems, their own translation equipment, their own security details. Humans had 5 chairs and a small table. "Ambassador Vasquez," a voice said behind her. Elena turned to see a Zephyrian approaching. She recognized him from the briefing materials. Sub-Arbitrator Kexthon, assistant to the High Arbitrator who would be leading today's session. "The High Arbitrator wishes me to inform you that this session will follow traditional galactic protocols," Kexthon said through his translation device. "You will be given time to respond to each point raised. However, the terms being presented today are the result of 3 months of careful deliberation by all represented species. They are not subject to negotiation." Elena felt Dr. Kim tense beside her. Not subject to negotiation? The galaxy has survived for millions of years through careful balance and proper procedures, Kexthon explained. When one species disrupts that balance, corrections must be made. Today's session will determine what corrections are required. Before Elena could respond, the chamber doors opened. Beings of every description filed in, taking their assigned places. The Zephyrians moved with military precision, their dark uniforms and rigid posture making them look like an army of shadows. The Crystalline Collective representatives rolled in on mechanical platforms, their bodies looking like living boulders studded with glowing gems. Elena had studied each species, but seeing them all together was overwhelming. Beings that had been spacefaring when humans were still living in caves. Civilizations that controlled hundreds of worlds. Military forces that could destroy Earth without breaking into a sweat. All of them here because of humanity. The human delegation took their seats. Elena noticed that their section was positioned so that they faced all the others like defendants in a courtroom. High Arbitrator Zixthalan entered last. He was over 3 meters tall, thin as a reed, with skin that seemed to absorb light. When he spoke, his voice came through the translation system with the weight of absolute authority. "This session will address the unauthorized expansion and disruptive activities of the human species," he announced. "Over the past 3 standard years, humanity has engaged in behaviors that threaten the stability of galactic civilization." Elena kept her expression neutral, but her heart was racing. The formal language made it sound like humanity was on trial for crimes against the galaxy. "The charges are as follows," Zixthalan continued, consulting a document that appeared to be carved from crystal. "First, rapid and uncontrolled expansion into 47 star systems without proper authorization from established territorial authorities." Colonel Morrison leaned over to whisper in Elena's ear. "Whose authorization? Nobody told us we needed permission to settle empty worlds." "Second, interference with established trade routes and economic relationships through unauthorized direct commerce." Trade specialist Williams started to speak, but Elena put a hand on his arm. "Wait," she mouthed, silently. "Third, disruption of social stability through the unauthorized harboring of refugees and dissidents from multiple species." Dr. Patel's face went red. The refugees were families fleeing wars, children whose parents had been killed in border conflicts, scientists looking for places where they could research freely. Fourth, uncontrolled sharing of technology without regard for established intellectual property and security protocols. Dr. Kim gripped the edge of the table. Human technology sharing had led to medical breakthroughs that were saving lives across a dozen species. They had helped former slave populations develop tools to build new communities. Fifth, failure to respect established hierarchies and protocols in diplomatic and economic relationships. Elena finally understood. This wasn't about expansion or trade or refugees. This was about the fact that humans treated everyone as equals. They didn't automatically defer to older, larger, or more militarily powerful species. They negotiated as partners, not as subjects. The assembled representatives of galactic civilization have agreed upon the following requirements for human compliance, Zixthalin announced. A holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber. Elena read the terms with growing disbelief. Humanity must immediately cease all expansion beyond their current 47 systems. No new colonies, no new outposts, no new settlements. All human military vessels must be reduced by 60%, with the decommissioned ships turned over to established galactic powers for redistribution. Human colonies must accept oversight. Committees from established species to monitor their activities and ensure compliance with galactic norms. All refugee populations in human space must be returned to their species of origin, regardless of their personal wishes or safety concerns. Human technological development must be subject to review and approval by a Galactic Technology Council. Trade between human colonies must be conducted through established trade routes and subject to traditional fees and oversight. Population growth in human space must be limited to approved levels to prevent demographic destabilization. As compensation for the disruption they had caused, humanity must pay reparations totaling 847 trillion galactic credits over the next 50 standard years. Elena stared at the terms. They weren't asking for compliance. They were asking for surrender. Complete, total surrender of everything that made human colonies attractive to their own people and to refugees from other species. These terms are final, Zixthalin announced. They have been agreed upon by all represented species. Compliance is not optional. Elena looked around the chamber. 12 different species, hundreds of representatives, all nodding in agreement. They had worked this out in advance. They had decided that humanity was too dangerous to be allowed to continue as they were. You have 1 standard hour to review the terms and confirm your species acceptance, Zixthalin said. After that, we will discuss implementation schedules and enforcement mechanisms. The chamber fell silent. Elena could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the eyes of hundreds of alien beings watching the human delegation. Dr. Kim leaned close to Elena's ear. They're not negotiating, she whispered. They're dictating surrender terms. Elena nodded slightly. She understood now. This meeting was never about finding a solution that worked for everyone. It was about putting humanity back in the box where the established powers thought they belonged. She looked at the terms one more time. Everything humans had built in 3 years, everything they had achieved, everything they had shared with others who needed help, all of it would have to stop. Colonel Morrison was studying the display with the expression of someone doing tactical calculations. Trade Specialist Williams was running numbers on his tablet, his face growing paler with each calculation. Dr. Patel was staring at the clause about returning refugees, her hands clenched into fists. Elena stood up slowly. The chamber watched her every move. We'll need some time to discuss this, she said. The human delegation was given a small conference room to discuss their response. The walls were transparent aluminum, which meant everyone in the corridor outside could see them talking. Elena suspected this was not an accident. 847 trillion credits, Trade Specialist Williams said, his voice hollow. That's more money than exists in the entire human economy. We could liquidate every asset on every world and still not pay a tenth of it. Colonel Morrison was pacing back and forth in the small space. The military reduction isn't just about ships. Look at the fine print. They want us to hand over our best vessels, our newest technology, our most experienced crews. What's left would barely be enough to patrol our own systems. Dr. Patel had been silent since they entered the room. Now she spoke, her voice tight with anger. The refugee clause is genocide. Pure and simple. They want us to send the youth and families back to Zephyrian space, where they'll be executed for desertion. They want us to return the crystalline dissidents to the collective, where they'll be dissolved for thinking the wrong thoughts. Elena sat at the small table, staring at her hands. Through the transparent walls, she could see aliens walking past, looking in at the humans like they were animals in a zoo exhibit. Dr. Kim activated her tablet and pulled up files they had prepared for the negotiations. I've been reviewing the colonial reports. Do you know what the biggest difference is between human settlements and the established alien colonies? The others looked at her. Growth rate, Dr. Kim said. Not population growth, economic growth, technological development, social advancement. The average human colony shows more progress in 1 year than most alien settlements show in a century. She projected her data into the room's holographic display. Charts and graphs appeared showing trade volumes, innovation rates, standard of living measurements. Take New Geneva, our colony in the Kepler system. 3 years ago, it was empty space. Now it's home to 2 million humans and 500,000 refugees from 6 different species. They're producing new medical technology. They're developing improved agricultural systems. They're building the largest interspecies university in known space. Elena studied the data. What about the alien colonies? Stagnant. The Zephyrian colonies have looked exactly the same for the last 1,000 years. Same population levels, same technology, same social structures. The crystalline collective hasn't developed a new mining technique in 5,000 years. They're still using the same equipment their ancestors built. Colonel Morrison stopped pacing. You're saying they're not growing because they can't? Or because they won't? Both, Dr. Kim replied. Their entire system is built around preventing change. If you're a Zephyrian scientist and you develop something new, you have to get approval from 17 different bureaucratic levels before you can test it. By then, you're usually dead from old age. Elena felt something clicking into place in her mind. And if you're a refugee from their system? You have 2 choices. Live as a second-class citizen forever, or try to escape to somewhere that offers something better. Dr. Kim switched to another display. Guess where most of them have been trying to escape to? The answer was obvious. Human space. Williams looked up from his calculations. That's why they're really upset. It's not about our expansion. It's about the fact that we're showing everyone that there's a better way to live. Elena stood and walked to the transparent wall. In the corridor outside, she could see representatives from the 12 species moving between meeting rooms, conducting their careful diplomatic business. Everything about their behavior spoke of ancient traditions, established procedures, ways of doing things that had not changed in millennia. They're afraid, she said quietly. Of course they're afraid, Colonel Morrison replied. We've got a bigger fleet than they expected. We're expanding faster than they like, and we're not following their rules. Elena shook her head. That's not what they're afraid of. They're afraid that their own people will see what we're doing and want the same thing. She turned back to face her team. Think about it. For thousands of years, they've maintained control by convincing everyone that slow growth is safe growth, that following established procedures is the only way to avoid chaos, that accepting your place in the hierarchy is the only way to survive. Dr. Patel was nodding. And then we show up and prove that's all wrong. We're not just expanding fast, Elena continued. We're expanding successfully. We're not just taking in refugees. We're giving them better lives than they had before. We're not just sharing technology. We're improving it and making it available to everyone. The implications were staggering. For millions of years, galactic civilization had operated on the principle that progress was dangerous, that change led to chaos, that the old ways were the only safe ways. Humanity had arrived and, without meaning to, had proved that all of it was wrong. Williams was staring at his economic projections. No wonder they want to charge us 800 trillion credits. They're not trying to punish us. They're trying to make sure we never have enough resources to continue growing. And the military reductions, Colonel Morrison added, aren't about making us weaker. They're about making sure we can't protect the refugees who come to us for help. Elena felt the weight of understanding settle on her shoulders. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an execution. The established powers had decided that the example humanity was setting was too dangerous to be allowed to continue. A soft chime indicated that their hour was almost up. "So what do we do?" Dr. Patel asked. Elena looked around the small room at her team. 5 humans representing the hopes and dreams of nearly 3 billion people. 5 people being asked to sign away everything their species had accomplished in 3 short years. "We go back in there and give them our answer," she said. "Which is what?" Colonel Morrison asked. Elena smiled, and for the first time since arriving at Concordia Prima, she felt completely calm. The truth. They returned to the main chamber, where the 12 species were waiting with the patience of beings that had been making these kinds of decisions for thousands of years. The terms of surrender were still displayed in the center of the room, along with additional documents that Elena realized were enforcement protocols. High Arbitrator Zix Thalan looked down at the human delegation from his elevated platform. "Have you reached a decision regarding compliance?" Elena stood. Around the chamber, hundreds of alien eyes focused on her. Translation devices activated, ready to carry her words to every corner of known space. "We have," she said. "State your species' position." Elena looked up at the holographic display showing the terms they were supposed to accept. 800 trillion credits, military surrender, colonial restrictions, refugee returns, technology, controls. Then she began to laugh. The sound was so unexpected that several translation devices malfunctioned, producing electronic squeals and static bursts. The Zephyrian delegation shifted nervously in their seats. The Crystalline Collective. Representatives flickered their warning lights. "You find the terms amusing?" Zix Thalan's voice carried a dangerous edge. Elena composed herself, but the smile remained on her face. "I find the whole situation amusing. 3 years ago, when we first made contact with your civilizations, we thought we were the newcomers. We thought you were the wise ancient species that we should learn from." She activated her own data pad, and new displays filled the chamber's holographic system. Charts showing human colonial development, refugee integration statistics, technological advancement rates, trade growth figures. But you know what we found instead? Stagnation. The Zephyrian hegemony hasn't developed a single new technology. In 50,000 years, the Crystalline Collective has been mining the same asteroid belts for millions of years, using the same techniques, producing the same yields. Angry sounds came from both delegations, but Elena continued. "You've all been playing the same game for so long that you've forgotten there might be other ways to play." She gestured to the displays around her. "Human colonies aren't just growing, they're thriving. Former refugees from your wars are building new lives, starting families, creating art, developing sciences you haven't seen in centuries." The Vorthon Empire delegate stood up, his translation device crackling with indignation. "You speak of matters you do not understand. Galactic civilization requires order, structure, control." "Does it?" Elena asked. "Because from where I stand, it looks like galactic civilization requires fear. You're all so afraid of change that you've stopped growing entirely. You've convinced yourselves that the only way to survive is to never take risks, never try anything new, never question the way things have always been done." High Arbitrator Zix Thalan's crest was flaring with anger. "You insolent creatures, do you not comprehend the forces arrayed against you? We represent 400 billion beings across thousands of star systems." Elena nodded. "You do, and yet, with all that power, all that history, all those resources, you're afraid of 800 million humans who just want to build something better." She looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. "You called us here to demand our compliance with your rules. But your rules have produced a galaxy where entire species live in fear, where technological development has stopped. The silence that followed was unlike anything Concordia Prima had ever experienced. For 3,000 years, species had come to this chamber to negotiate, compromise, and ultimately submit to the collective will of galactic civilization. Some had argued. Some had pleaded. Some had made counteroffers that were eventually accepted or rejected. None had ever simply stood up and prepared to leave. Elena Vasquez looked around the chamber one last time, at the representatives of 12 species that controlled hundreds of star systems and commanded fleets that could darken the skies of entire worlds. Then she picked up her briefcase and started walking toward the exit. Her team followed without hesitation. Colonel Morrison fell into step beside her, his military bearing unchanged despite the hundreds of hostile alien eyes watching their retreat. Dr. Kim gathered her data tablets, the displays still showing the comparison charts that had so angered the assembly. Dr. Patel and trade specialist Williams collected their materials in calm silence, 5 humans walking across a chamber designed to hold thousands. Their footsteps echoed in the vast space, the only sound in a room that had suddenly become as quiet as deep space itself. "Where do you think you're going?" The voice came from the crystalline collective section, a harmonic sound that made the translation devices hum. Elena paused but didn't turn around. "Home. Home." High Arbitrator Zixthalin rose from his elevated platform, his 3-meter frame casting a long shadow across the chamber floor. "You cannot simply leave. The terms have been presented. You must respond." Elena turned slowly to face him. "We did respond. You rejected the carefully considered judgment of galactic civilization." "We rejected your judgment," Elena corrected. "There's a difference." The Vorthan Empire delegate was gesturing frantically at his translation device. "This is unprecedented, unacceptable. Species do not simply walk away from the Council of Concordia." Dr. Kim stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "Why not?" The question seemed to catch everyone off guard. Elena watched as the assembled delegates looked at each other, searching for an answer to something they had never considered. Because this is how these matters are resolved," stammered the Silicon Confederacy's representative. "This is how galactic civilization functions. For you," Elena said, "this is how it functions for you. You've created a system where 12 species decide what's best for everyone else, and everyone else accepts it, because they're afraid of what happens if they don't." She gestured toward the holographic displays that still showed the terms of human surrender. "But we're not afraid. We're disappointed." High Arbitrator Zixthalin's crest flared bright red. "Disappointed?" Elena nodded. 3 years ago, we thought we were meeting the great civilizations of the galaxy, ancient species with millions of years of wisdom and experience. We thought we would learn from you, partner with you, maybe even become friends." She looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives. "Instead, we found bullies. Species so afraid of change, so terrified of losing their positions, that they would rather destroy anything new than risk losing control." The Zephyrian military delegation was on its feet now, their hands moving to weapons that Elena was sure they carried despite the station's neutrality protocols. Colonel Morrison noticed the movement and shifted his stance slightly, not threatening but ready. "You dare insult the gathered powers of the galaxy?" Zixthalin's voice was rising to levels that made the translation system crackle with feedback. "We're not insulting anyone," Elena replied calmly. "We're just refusing to play your game anymore." "Game?" The word came from multiple delegations at once, translated into a dozen different harmonic patterns. Elena smiled sadly. "Yes, game. The game where you pretend that stagnation is stability, where you convince everyone that the old ways are the only safe ways, where you maintain power by making sure nobody else ever gets strong enough to challenge you." Trade Specialist Williams stepped forward, his tablet displaying economic data. "Do you want to know what we found when we analyzed your economies? The Zephyrian hegemony has the same gross domestic product today that it had 1,000 years ago. The crystalline collective is actually producing less now than they were a century ago." The chamber erupted in angry voices again, but Williams continued speaking, his voice carrying over the din. "You're not ruling over a thriving galactic civilization. You're managing a slow decline, and you've convinced yourselves that decline is normal." Dr. Patel activated her own display, showing refugee statistics. "In 3 years, over 2 million beings from your territories have asked for asylum in human space. Not because we conquered them, not because we forced them to come, but because we offered them something you couldn't: hope." Sedition, roared the Vorthan delegate. You speak of sedition and rebellion. We speak of choice, Dr. Patel replied. The choice to live somewhere that you can build a better life for your children. The choice to work toward something more than just surviving until tomorrow. Elena checked her chronometer. The UES Harmony would be ready for departure in 20 minutes. Their clearance to leave the station had been filed before the meeting began, a precaution that now seemed prophetic. This conversation is over, she announced. It is not over. Zixthalin slammed his staff against the floor with enough force to crack the crystal surface. You will not be permitted to leave until this matter is resolved. Elena looked at him with something that might have been pity. You still don't understand, do you? You can't make us stay. You can't force us to. Accept your terms. You can't control us the way you control everyone else. She started walking again, her team following. Behind them, the chamber descended into chaos as 12 different species began shouting at once, their translation devices overloading and producing a cacophony of electronic noise. They were halfway to the exit when the Silicon Confederacy's ambassador called out, his voice cutting through the noise with desperate clarity. What about the consequences? Economic sanctions, trade embargoes, military blockades. Elena paused at the chamber's threshold and looked back one last time. What about them? You cannot survive without galactic civilization. Elena smiled. Watch us. The blast doors began to close behind the human delegation, but Elena's voice carried through the narrowing gap. Oh, and one more thing. When your own people start asking why they can't have what human colonies have, remember that you had a chance to be part of something better. You chose fear instead. The doors sealed shut with a soft hiss. In the corridor outside, the human delegation walked in silence toward the docking bays. Other aliens they passed stopped to stare, word of what had happened already spreading through the station's communication networks. Ma'am, Colonel Morrison said quietly, the Zephyrian dreadnought is powering up its weapons. Elena didn't change her pace. Are they targeting us? Not yet, but they're making sure we know they could. Let them. We're still in neutral space, and even they won't violate Concordia Prima's neutrality. Too many species depend on this place for peace talks. They reached the docking bay where the UES Harmony waited, its engines already warming up for immediate departure. Captain Torres met them at the airlock. How did it go? He asked. Elena looked back down the corridor toward the diplomatic section of the station. Through the transparent walls, she could see beings running back and forth, urgent conversations taking place, communication devices flashing with priority signals. About as well as expected, she said. They boarded the ship and sealed the airlock behind them. As the Harmony detached from the station and began its journey back to human space, Elena watched Concordia Prima shrink in the viewports. The massive structure that had seemed so impressive a few hours ago now looked like what it really was, a monument to civilizations that had stopped growing. Captain, she said, set course for Sol system, maximum speed. Yes, ma'am. ETA 48 hours. Elena settled into her chair and opened her personal communication device. She had reports to write, superiors to brief, and a species to prepare for whatever came next. But first, she wanted to record her thoughts while they were still fresh. Personal. Log Ambassador Elena Vasquez, she began. Today humanity walked away from galactic civilization, not because we wanted to, but because we had to. Because staying would have meant becoming something we're not willing to become. She paused, looking out at the stars streaming past the viewport. I don't know what happens next. Maybe they'll try to make good on their threats. Maybe they'll leave us alone. Maybe they'll realize that fear isn't a foundation you can build, a civilization on forever. She closed the device and leaned back in her chair. In 48 hours, she would be back on Earth, delivering news that would change everything. The galaxy's great powers had shown their true nature, and humanity had chosen to chart its own course. Whatever came next, they would face it as they had faced everything else since reaching the stars. Together, hopeful, and absolutely refusing to accept that the way things were was the way things had to be. Behind them, Concordia Prima continued its ancient orbit, carrying the representatives of 12 species who were only just beginning to realize what humanity's departure really meant. For the first time in galactic history, someone had said no. 6 months after the humans walked away from Concordia Prima, High Arbitrator Zixthalan stared at reports that made no sense. The numbers were wrong. The patterns were broken. Everything that galactic civilization had counted on for thousands of years was falling apart. "Explain this to me again," he said to his intelligence chief, Sub-Arbitrator Vexolan. Vexolan activated the holographic display in Zixthalan's private office. Charts and graphs filled the space between them, all showing the same impossible trend. The human colonies are not only continuing to expand, they're growing faster than ever, Vexolan reported. 7 new settlements established in the past 6 months, colonial populations up 18%, economic output increasing at rates we've never recorded. Zixthalan studied the data with growing frustration. "That's impossible. We cut them off from established trade routes. We froze their access to galactic banking systems. We made it clear that any species caught trading with humans would face consequences." "Yes, sir. But the humans adapted. They've created their own trade networks, their own banking systems, their own supply chains. And," Vexolan hesitated. "And what? They're not alone anymore." The display changed to show star maps with movement patterns marked in different colors. Zixthalan felt his crest begin to droop as he realized what he was seeing. "Those are Vorthon ships," he said slowly. "Yes, sir. 3 entire mining fleets have abandoned their quotas and joined human colonies. They're not returning to Vorthon space." "And those?" "Crystalline collective transport vessels. They were supposed to deliver processed minerals to the central distribution hub. Instead, they've established permanent trading partnerships with human settlements." Zixthalan felt something cold settling in his stomach. "How many?" "Difficult to get exact numbers, but our estimates suggest over 50,000 Vorthon citizens have relocated to human space in the past 6 months. The Crystalline Collective has lost approximately 12% of their transport fleet to what they're calling voluntary reassignment." The holographic display showed more data: ship movements, population transfers, economic flows that bypassed traditional galactic systems entirely. "It's not just the Vorthans and Crystallines," Vexolan continued. "We're seeing defections from our own outer colonies. Young Zephyrians, mostly. Scientists, engineers, artists, they're leaving for human space and not coming back." Zixthalan's claws scraped against his desk surface. "How many of our people?" "Last month alone, nearly 2,000. The number hit Zixthalan like a physical blow. 2,000 Zephyrians, abandoning their duties, their families, their entire civilization to join the humans. In a species that measured change in centuries, such a rapid population shift was unthinkable. What are they telling their families? What reasons are they giving?" Vexolan activated a new display showing intercepted communications. The reasons vary, but there are common themes. They speak of opportunities that don't exist in our space, research projects that aren't restricted by traditional protocols, social relationships that cross species boundaries, illegal relationships. "Legal in human space, sir. The humans have no restrictions on interspecies collaboration, friendship, or even romantic partnerships." Zixthalan stood and walked to the window of his office, looking out at the sprawling capital city of the Zephyrian hegemony. The massive towers stretched toward the sky, each one built according to plans that were thousands of years old. Nothing had changed in this view for longer than most species had existed. What about the other powers? Are they experiencing similar losses? "Yes, sir. The Silicon Confederacy reports that their best technical minds are emigrating to human space at unprecedented rates. The Vorthon Empire has lost 3 entire colony populations to what they're calling voluntary evacuation. Even some of the smaller species that usually never cause problems are showing signs of unrest." Zixthalan turned back to face his intelligence. "Chief, unrest? Questions about why their governments don't allow the same freedoms that humans offer. Demands for explanations about why expansion has been forbidden for so long. Requests for permission to establish direct trade relationships with human colonies." The implications were staggering. For millions of years, galactic civilization had maintained stability through a simple principle. Everyone accepted their place in the established order. The powerful ruled, the weak obeyed, and nobody questioned the system because there was no alternative. Now there was an alternative. Have any of the governments granted these requests? No, sir, but that's causing problems of its own. The Vorthan Empire is dealing with the first labor strikes in their recorded history. Crystalline collective mining operations are reporting productivity drops as workers demand better conditions. There have even been demonstrations on some of the outer Zephyrian colonies. Demonstrations. Sixth Thalan had to search his memory to recall the last time Zephyrians had demonstrated about anything. It might have been before humans had even evolved. "Show me the human settlements," he ordered. The display changed to show detailed scans of human colonies. Sixth Thalan expected to see struggling outposts barely surviving without galactic support. Instead, he saw thriving cities, growing industries, and infrastructure projects that put established galactic colonies to shame. "This is New Geneva," Vexolan explained. "Established 3 years ago with a population of 50,000. Current population, 4.2 million, including refugees and immigrants from 14 different species." The images showed gleaming towers that rivaled anything in the Zephyrian capital, parks and gardens designed for multiple species, research facilities that were already producing innovations that the established powers hadn't seen in centuries. "And this is Harmony Station," Vexolan continued, "built entirely by human-alien cooperative efforts. It's become the largest trading hub in this sector, processing more goods than the traditional crystalline collective facilities." Sixth Thalan studied the images with growing alarm. Where did they get the resources, the expertise, the technology to build all this? From the refugees and immigrants themselves. It turns out that when you treat people as equals and give them opportunities to contribute, they work harder than anyone expected. The next image showed what had once been an empty star system. Now it housed a massive orbital university surrounded by research stations, manufacturing facilities, and residential areas that looked like floating cities. "The Darwin Institute," Vexolan said, "founded by human and alien scientists working together. In 6 months, they've published more breakthrough research than the entire Zephyrian Science Academy has produced in the last century." Sixth Thalan felt his worldview crumbling. How is this possible? Because they're not afraid to try new things, Vexolan said quietly. Because they don't spend decades getting approval for every experiment. Because they share their discoveries, instead of hoarding them. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority message. Vexolan checked his communication device and his expression grew even more grave. "Sir, you're not going to like this." "What now?" "The emergency session of the Galactic Council. 3 more species have requested permission to establish direct diplomatic relations with humanity." Sixth Thalan's crest flared bright red. "Which 3? The Helix Consortium, the Orbital Collective, and the Reef Builders. These were smaller species, client states that had always followed the lead of the major powers. If they were openly requesting to deal with humanity, it meant the entire structure of galactic politics was breaking down. And the major powers, what's their position? The Crystalline Collective is privately suggesting that perhaps some accommodation with humanity might be beneficial. The Vorthan Empire is dealing with too many internal problems to take a strong stance. The Silicon Confederacy is reportedly considering offering humans some form of limited trading partnership." Sixth Thalan sank into his chair. 6 months ago, he had commanded the respect and fear of hundreds of species across thousands of star systems. He had been the voice of galactic law and order, the arbiter of disputes, the keeper of the ancient ways. Now species were ignoring his authority and seeking relationships with the humans who had dared to walk away from his judgment. "What about sanctions?" he asked desperately. "Military pressure? Economic isolation?" "Sir," Vexolan said gently, "who would we sanction? The humans are trading with dozens of species now. Their colonies are producing their own food, their own technology, their own military equipment. And any species we threaten just asks why they can't have what the humans are offering." The truth was spreading across the galaxy like a virus. The realization that the old ways weren't the only ways. that progress was possible, that fear wasn't a foundation for civilization. Zixthalan accessed his private communication channel and sent a message to his counterparts among the other major powers. The reply came within hours, an invitation to an emergency meeting at Concordia Prima. 2 days later, Zixthalan found himself in the same chamber where the humans had walked away 6 months earlier. But now, instead of 12 united species, he saw a gathering of increasingly desperate leaders trying to hold together a system that was coming apart at the seams. "The situation is unacceptable," declared the Crystalline Collective's primary representative.